There is no definitive guide on what it means to be a professional editor. Every editing house, film studio and independent content team have different systems, needs and requirements. That being said, there are certain bits of knowledge and know-how that are vital for operating at the highest level. While these skills are primarily developed over time and with practice, there are plenty of tools inside Lightworks that can help you bring the professional edge to your editing and make sure you're on track to hit the pro scene. In this collection of videos, we'll talk you through some of these features and how you can use them inside Lightworks to take your editing up a level. In this video section, we're going to show you how you can make use of Lightworks' built-in quick conversion LUTs. LUT, L-U-T, stands for lookup table, and simply put, they contain the data to convert your footage from one type of colour space to another. The purpose of the quick conversion LUTs in Lightworks is to easily convert your footage from a log colour space to a Rec 709 colour space. What does that actually mean though? Well, if we play our footage back, you can see it's a nicely compositioned shot with a lot of detail captured, but it's also very flat and lifeless when it comes to things like colour and contrast. This is an intentional aspect of shooting in log, which you should always do if possible. With log, the goal is for your camera to capture as much detail as possible by sacrificing those other aspects, knowing that you can bring them back during post-production. This is exactly what we're going to do now using LUTs, and there are a few different ways you can go about doing this. Lightworks is pretty clever in that it can analyse your footage metadata, determine the camera used, and highlight those LUTs for you. But in the event that you need to manually apply your LUTs, then it's a simple process. First up, let's apply a LUT to some footage we've already imported to Lightworks. The first thing you need to do is make sure your available footage is in list view, which you can do by using the view toggle button here. I'm already in list view, but chances are you'll be starting off in grid view, so click the button and make sure you're seeing more text than images. In list view, right click on your column headers here and you'll get a list of available additional sections. They're alphabetical, so scroll down to the L's and click on the box next to LUT to activate it. As you can see, that's activated an additional LUT column with a drop down box for each piece of footage. We'll click on the drop down next to the footage that's currently placed on our timeline and you'll be met with a list of common camera manufacturers. Now this is important. While log is a specific shooting concept, it's not universal. There are many variations of it and each camera manufacturer has its own version of it. In order to make the best use of quick conversion LUTs, you need to know what type of log footage you're applying the LUT to. If you shot this footage yourself, then you should already know, but if it's been provided to you by someone else, then you may need to check the metadata or inquire with that person to find out. For our footage here, I know this was shot on a Sony a7S III and used the S-Log3 camera profile with an S-Gamma3 preset. But all that means doesn't really matter for the purpose of this tutorial. The important thing is just that you know what settings we use so you can apply the correct LUT. So knowing what settings we use means we know what LUT we're looking for and can just scroll down the list. You can see some of the names here are cut off, but that's okay. You can just drag the edge of the column header along to expand the width of the list. So we'll keep scrolling through our list and there it is. S-Gamma3, S-Log3, perfect. At this point it's just as simple as clicking on it and there you go. That's changed our footage into something much more natural and realistic looking. I'll play that back a bit now so you can really see the difference. Just as a reminder, I'll edit in some pre-LUT footage here. And now back to the footage with the LUT applied. Makes all the difference, right? But what happens if you choose a different LUT? Well, it all depends on the LUT you choose, really. Some of them will have completely the wrong look, like this one, for example. But if we choose another incorrect one that's closer to the desired look, you can see it's not too bad. Pretty close. But then if we choose the correct LUT again, you can see that while it was close, it was maybe just a little darker than we'd like, amongst other things. That being said, this all comes down to preference. Maybe you'll decide an alternative LUT looks best for your desired look, and that's okay. I'd recommend always starting with the technically correct LUT though, just so you have a baseline to compare against if nothing else. If you want to apply a LUT to a few different clips at once, you can just hold Ctrl or Command and click on those clips. Then do the same method of choosing the LUT from a drop down and it will apply it to all of those selected, as you can see here in the little preview windows. Another method is to click on the first or last clip that you want selected, hold Shift and then click on the clip you want at the opposite end of the group selection. That will select those two clips and every other clip in between them. From there it's the same method again. Choose a LUT from the drop down and it will apply it to all of the selected clips. You can also hit Ctrl or Command and the A key to quickly select all clips if you know you want all of them. So that's how we can apply LUTs to already imported footage, but it's also possible for you to do the quick conversion while importing. If I click on local files, and then you would need to navigate to wherever the footage you want to import is stored on your device. For the sake of time, I've pre-selected my footage folder. Once you're in the right folder, you need to enable the LUT column if it's not already there, and you can do this by using the same method as before. Make sure you're on the list view by clicking the toggle button, and then right click on the column header and make sure you have LUT ticked. With that column active, you can choose from the drop down for the individual clips, or use the previous methods of Control or Command, Shift, or Select All to batch select. From there, just choose the LUT from the drop down and it will be applied to your selected clips. Then you just hit import and that footage will come into Lightworks with the LUT already applied. So that's how we get a quick convert going on our footage, but there's also a third way of using LUTs that doesn't affect the footage directly. If you want to see your footage with the LUT applied in the playback window, but don't want it to actually be applied to your footage, this is the best option for you. You simply go to your project card up here on the top left and head to the video tab. In the output section at the bottom, you'll see a tick box called View in LUT. Before we tick that, let's quickly turn off the previously applied LUTs. Okay, so with those off, we'll head back to the project card and you can see here that S-Gamut3 is already selected. If it's your first time using this option, it won't be, so you will go into the same drop down as usual and select your LUT. Once that's selected, it's just a case of clicking on the circle so it goes green, or clicking it again to turn it off. As you can see, that turns the LUT on and off in the playback window, but the actual footage remains unaffected. Useful for if you want to edit in Rec 709, but once you're done, need the footage to remain in log for whatever reason. The last thing I want to note around LUTs is that you can import your own. If I choose the user option from our list, you can see some I've imported previously. These ones serve a different function to our quick conversion LUTs. They're from a Halloween-inspired project meant to recreate the look of specific films. So if I choose the Evil Dead one, for example, you can see that it applies a LUT that tries to recreate the look of that film. We have a shortcuts video around exactly how you import and use these types of LUTs, so I will link that down in the description below and you can check that out. And there we go. That's quick conversion LUTs in a nutshell. Though there's quite a lot of explanation here, just remember that it all boils down to choosing the right LUT for your footage. In this video section, we're going to look at scopes. Scopes are a method of measuring the luminance, chrominance, and saturation of your footage. This is a fancy way of saying they allow you to adjust the colour and brightness of your footage in an accurate and unbiased manner. You might be wondering why you just can't use your eyes. It should be evident if something's too red or too blue, right? Well, not really. Your eyes are excellent at adjusting to what's in front of them. So if you bring in some footage and the colour correction is a little off, your eyes will quite happily compensate. Another issue is your monitor. Your monitor will lie to you. Every screen handles colour differently, and the same image can look very different from one monitor to the next. Adjusting your colours by eye simply means you're making it look correct for your monitor rather than objectively correct. Scopes provide an unbiased method of evaluating and balancing your colours and brightness, ensuring that the work has been done correctly rather than what your eyes subjectively think looks good. So that's why we use scopes, but how do we use them? Well, let's meet our three leading players for this video. We have waveform scopes, vector scopes, and histograms. Let's go through these one at a time and see what they do. First things first though, how do you actually get your scopes up in Lightworks? Well, just head to the VFX tab, right click on your playback window and choose Video Tools. We already have a vector scope up and running here. To select some others, you just click the three dots. Vector scopes is already ticked, and today I also want RGB, Y, and histogram. The first one we're going to look at is Y, and this is a waveform scope. In the simplest terms, this scope looks at the brightness of our image. I have this simple white to black gradient in place so we can ease ourselves into this. The first thing you need to know about a waveform scope is that it represents whatever frame of your footage you're currently on from left to right. In terms of the graph, 100 at the top represents pure white or maximum brightness, and 0 at the bottom represents pure black or maximum darkness. Everything in between is a form of grey. As an example of how you can read this, we can see our line here goes from 100 down to 10. This means the left hand side of the image is white, but the right hand side of the image is actually not black. It's a very dark grey. On some monitors, depending on how they're calibrated, this would easily look black, but we know from the scope that it's not. If we bump up our contrast here, we can see that it moves from 10 down to 0, meaning that we do in fact now have pure black down there. But that's also increased the amount of white in the image, as you can see from our 100 line extending across the top here. Now having too much on the 100 line or the 0 line is not a good thing. If you have pure white or pure black, it probably does mean those parts of your images are too bright or too dark, and any details contained within will be lost. Now I'm not saying there's never any situation where you might want black or white, but overall, on footage of the natural world, you don't want to lose that detail, so be careful you're not scraping the top or the bottom whenever possible. Now it's important to note you can't actually use your scope to tell what's in an image. If we put a grey circle here on the screen, you can see the waveform doesn't know or represent that it's a circle. It simply knows that you have some grey here in the middle of your frame. So that's the basics covered, let's move on to some actual footage. Looks a lot more complex, right? Don't worry, the fundamentals are the same. You can see here we've got some light parts heading up towards 100, which will be the sky, the water, maybe some of this light green grass here. We've also got some dark bits down here, which will be things like the shadows in the trees. Then there's this sudden drop towards black where this tree blocks out most of the lighter parts, leaving us with just a dark part of the clip. Hopefully that shows it's not too difficult to translate your footage onto the waveform. You can simply follow along from left to right, and anytime you see a sudden deviation, look at roughly that same point of your footage and you'll easily spot what's causing it. Now, if you pay particular attention to this section of our footage, you can see some almost black shadows. That's represented around here on the waveform. Watch what happens as we scrub forward. The camera is moving forward and the dark area moves out of the shot. As that happens, you can see it disappear on the waveform, as that darkness has left the screen and so is no longer represented on the graph. So how can we use this? Well, let's hop into our color correction tools and have a play around. There's a lot you can achieve with this, and you'll really learn by doing, but there's a couple of things you can try to get started. The first thing is gauging your contrast. As it stands, our footage pretty much runs most of the brightness gamut from 0 up to 90, meaning we have a pretty wide range of contrast. If we lower our contrast down, you can see all the waveform data getting closer together, as there's less range to our midtones. If it all gets too bunched up in the middle, that means the majority of our image is simply a mid-grey and probably looks quite flat, as you can see in our playback window. If we go too far the other way, you can see that there's now a lot of pure white and pure black in our image, which means we're probably going to be losing a lot of detail in those areas. This waveform is also useful for measuring the effect of adjusting your brightness. Maybe you want your footage to be a little bit lighter. As you can see, we've lightened our footage and it's moved the whole range up, but still within acceptable levels. But if you go too bright, you'll see a lot of pure white starting to creep into your waveform on the 100 line. Once you're hitting these top or bottom levels, you'll be losing detail in your image, as pure white or pure black inherently can't contain any detail. So generally you don't want too much of either. Scopes are a great way of adjusting both the brightness and contrast while making sure you stay within acceptable levels. Now the thing with the Y waveform is it's all about brightness. If we adjust the saturation here to boost or remove some colour from the image, you can see it's no real effect on the waveform. For colour, we want the RGB waveform. This shows you the reds, greens and blues that make up your image. If you click on your three dots, you can choose to see each channel individually, but today we're going to look at all three together. The principles are the same either way. Having all three together next to each other is known as a parade. You read each section of the parade in the same way as our Y waveform, from left to right, with 100 representing a pure version of the colour and 0 representing the colour completely removed. If all three were to be at 100, your image would be white, and if all three were at 0, that would be black. As you can see here, our footage is fairly well balanced, as all three are at pretty similar levels. But what happens if you bring in some footage that's been poorly white balanced on set and has more of a blue tone to it, for example? Well, you can see that our blue is now more dominant, the green is largely the same, and the reds are lacking. We can use our colour correction tools to fix this, but I'm not going to do so with any real detail or precision, as we're here for scopes, not colour correction, which is a whole different subject matter. So what I'm going to do is quickly tweak some of these looking at nothing but my scopes. I'm not even going to glance over at my playback window. I'll even cover it up for you to make sure you have the same experience. Watching my scopes here, you can see that we're bringing that red up a little, being careful not to degrade the blue or the green down too much, as we don't want to go too far in the other direction. So just a bit more tweaking. Now my scopes are telling me this is more balanced than it was at the start. So if we uncover our playback window, and yeah, you can see it looks a lot more natural now. Well, it does on my monitor at least, it may not on yours, but that's the entire point. Regardless of how it looks on our monitors, we can trust that it's objectively closer to how it should look thanks to the scopes. It's not going to be perfect, but we also spent about 10 seconds on it, so it's not bad at all really for the time. By understanding and using your scopes, you can perform both really precise colour work and quick fixes when needed. So that's waveforms in a nutshell. Next up you have vector scopes. Now, just when we were getting used to our waveform graph, we suddenly have this crazy circle in the mix. I know what you're thinking. What on earth is this? This is ridiculous. First there are graphs, now circles. Is this maths? Are they sneaking in a pie chart? I didn't get into video editing to do charts and circles. Oh my god, what is happening? That's what I assume you're thinking. That's what I was thinking the first time I learned all this stuff. But don't worry, it's not actually that scary or different. The vector scope is just another way of evaluating your colour, primarily in terms of saturation this time. Before we show it in action, let's break it down a little. Around the circle we have sections for our primary colours, red, blue and green. And then our secondary colours, magenta, cyan and yellow. We also have this extra line here that represents skin tones. These little boxes in each section represent the maximum level of saturation you should go to. If you go beyond them, you can start to clip your footage and lose detail. Sort of in the same way as taking your brightness too high or too low would lose detail back on our first Y waveform. So let's look at this colour chart here. You can see we have each of the colours extending out towards their sections, and our white bit in the middle shows our non-coloured boxes. You can also see the skin tones moving up the skin tone line. If we increase our saturation, you can see that the lines get closer to the boxes, and as we decrease it, you can see they group closer together at our central point. This indicates more or less saturation. So let's take two shots next to each other on the timeline. The first one is looking good, not too saturated, not too unsaturated. The next one is lacking a little colour though. So we can up our saturation a little until it's in roughly the same zone as the first clip. There we go, much better. You could fiddle around with all this in our colour correction tools to get it even closer, but it'll do for now. So that's waveforms and vector scopes. The last one I want to show you how to use today is a histogram. If you're a self shooter, then you're probably familiar with those from your camera. Functionally, they work the same as a waveform, but kind of tipped on its side. On a waveform, you can see your shadows, your midtones, and your highlights split horizontally. On a histogram, you can see your shadows, your midtones, and your highlights split vertically. You can see back on the Y waveform that the activity exists primarily in the 10 to 30 range, meaning our image leans a little towards the dark side. On the histogram, you can see the same thing. There are some disadvantages to the histogram versus the waveform. For example, on our waveform, we can sort of tell which part of the footage is being represented. We can see a drop in the brightness here, and it corresponds to that part of our image, so we can easily work out what is causing it in the shot if we need to. On the histogram, we can tell the brightness drops at some points, but we have no idea where in the shot that's happening. In terms of adjusting the footage, if we brighten our image up, you can see we move closer to the lighter end, and if we darken it down, you can see we move closer to the darker end. As with the waveform scope, going too far in either direction will start to lose you some detail in your shot. When shooting or before your footage is graded, you really want your histogram all lumped up in the middle here so you haven't gone too far in either direction. But as we improve our colours and increase our contrast, it all spreads out for that extra pop. While waveforms do hold some advantages, histograms can be a little easier to understand at a glance, and some people do prefer using them. The choice is always yours. So that's the 3 initial types of scope I wanted to show you to get you started. In our settings here, you may have noticed there's some other scope options, such as YCBCR or CIE. These scopes are a little more complicated to understand and probably aren't as useful to you as you first wrap your head around the wacky world of scopes, so we won't touch them today. They are important though, so we will cover them in a future video. Until then, your best bet for learning scopes is to bring some footage into Lightworks and just have a play around with them. They become a lot clearer once you see them in action for yourself. Look, switching to 10-bit editing is so easy it hardly requires a tutorial. Just head up to your project card up here on the top left, go to the video tab, and where it says GPU precision, change from 8-bit to 16-bit. There we go. Easy as that, you now have up to 16-bit editing and export available to you, and the most cameras you'll be working with are probably outputting 10-bit at the most. The fact we go higher than that is mainly for future proofing. To use this now, you simply need to bring in some footage shot in 10-bit. The advantage of this is primarily an issue of quality. 8-bit videos can display over 16.7 million colours. Now, that might sound like a lot, but when you switch to 10-bit video, you can use more than 1 billion colours for your footage. Suddenly, that 16 million is not sounding as good. Having all this extra colour and contrast available to you allows far more control when adjusting your colour, contrast and brightness, and a loss of quality will not be an issue for you. Overall, this is going to give you far better looking imagery, more natural colours, smoother transitions, and removes issues like banding that are common with 8-bit footage. If you have 10-bit footage available to you, then you should always edit in 10-bit mode to ensure you're getting the most from your footage. 10-bit footage can be more intense and may well slow down your computer, but you can always get around this by using proxies or editing in 8-bit and then just switching to 10-bit for any colour work and your final export. It's important to have standards, right? In the case of user-generated content like YouTube, it's not a requirement, but it can definitely help you stand out from the pack. In the case of professional distribution channels such as Netflix or TV stations, it's an actual requirement. Either way, making sure your content has the highest level of quality control is great practice to get into. This is where automated quality control, also known as AQC, software comes into play. AQC software will automatically check your footage for you and alert you to any errors or issues that will either break compliance with the standards of your distribution platform or at the very least create an unpleasant viewing experience. Lightworks has a piece of sister software called QScan, which is one of the leading AQC platforms on the market, and in a video editing software world first, you can now use QScan to analyse your footage directly inside Lightworks. I should note here that to use this you're required to have a separate subscription to QScan, but there are packages available for all level of editors. Qscan also currently needs to run on Windows, although as long as you have an instance of it set up and running on a Windows machine, you can access it through Lightworks on other operating systems. So with that housekeeping out of the way, let's show you how this works. The first time you want to use Qscan, you'll need to configure it inside Lightworks. It's a quick and easy process though. From your project browser, click on System Settings, go down to Quality Control, and choose Configure. You'll get a pop-up box where you log into Qscan. I'll go ahead and cover up my details here. Can't be too careful, right? Next up you have Preferences. I wouldn't worry too much about these while you're just getting started, the default should be fine. Finally, we have Templates. Most of these will be the default ones that come with Qscan and serve most major distribution channels, but you can also create your own automated templates inside Qscan to meet your specific requirements. We've got Amazon in here, HBO, Netflix, all the big players really, with more templates being added all the time. So that's Qscan all set up, let's dive into a project and see it in action. Once you're in your project, just find the footage you want to QC, right click on it, and as I'm sure you can guess, head down to the QC option. In here you'll find all the templates you've brought in, and if you hover over them you can see what they check for. Even on YouTube, a distribution channel with less stringent requirements, you can see Qscan checks for a lot of stuff. We'll go ahead and choose that for today. We get a box down here confirming that the task has started, and to see it in progress, head to your project card up here on the top left, and if it's not already selected, head to the Tasks tab. The progress bar goes up, and there we go. In no time at all, we've analysed our footage. We get a pop-up box here confirming that the job is done and alerting us to the issues it's detected. Now there's a few ways we can interact with this. We can generate a web report or a PDF report, which we'll take a look at. We'll download that, open it up, and here you have an in-depth analysis of the issues you can share around if needed. You can always just review the issues inside Lightworks as well. If we click on our QC tab here, you can see a breakdown of the errors in the footage. Markers indicating the errors have also been added to our playback bar as well. So if you hover over those, you can see what the error is and how long it lasts for on the footage. Or you can click on the errors from the list and have the playhead jump to that location on the playback bar. You could also switch to timeline view and view them against your footage and audio as well. Another way to use this is to check your finished edit for errors while exporting. You go through the usual exporting process, right click, choose export, and then choose your preferred export options. The usual export settings box will pop up, but now you have an extra section to it called Quality Control. Here you can choose your template again from the full list. We'll stick with YouTube for now, and then just hit start to begin your export. The usual export progress bar comes up and runs along, but once that's done, your QC progress kicks in. The usual export log is opened up, but once the QC progress is done, some additional details pop into the box highlighting any issues. You may also notice that these issues have been added to your project timeline, so we can now easily go back in, check them out, and fix them if needed. This is a great way to evaluate your entire edit. So that's a whirlwind tour to using Qscan AQC directly inside Lightworks. You might not be quite ready for the big name streaming platforms yet, but even if you're just uploading to somewhere like YouTube, checking the quality of your project is a great practice to get into at any stage of your career. Hopefully you now have a basic understanding of how to use LUTs, scopes, 10-bit editing, and automated quality control. The best way to fully understand these systems is simply to get stuck in and have a go. You'll find that they're easier than you might think once you're in the driver's seat. Getting started is the hardest part, but hopefully this video has gone some way to helping you achieve that. If you need more advice or are confused about anything, you can always leave a comment here, or join our friendly Lightworks community filled with current and former professional editors on the official Lightworks forum. Just head to lwks.com for that, and for now, thank you for watching and happy editing.